Before we talk about Vault-Tec conspiracies, Enclave shadows, or cold fusion technology, this video is about something much quieter and far more dangerous. Fallout Season 2 doesn't reveal its most important character with a gunfight, a speech, or a shocking twist. It reveals her with a notebook. This is the story of Betty Pearson, and why Episode 6, The Other Player, quietly tells us who actually understands the game Fallout is playing.
Betty, I want you to get me every bit of information you can.
Not who's angry about it, not who's trying to stop it, but who is prepared to survive it. Episode 6 of Fallout is packed with obvious, loud developments. Vault-Tec's moral decay becomes undeniable. The cold fusion project grows more ominous, and the Enclave's presence inches closer to the surface. On a first watch, the episode feels dense, almost overwhelming, as if the show is daring you to keep up. But Fallout has never been about what it shouts at the audience. Its most important information is almost always delivered quietly, in moments that feel incidental until you realize what they imply. One of those moments happens after the Vault-Tec boardroom chaos, when Barb Howard finally drops her public-facing executive mask. Throughout the meeting, Barb performs exactly as expected, navigating corporate insanity with controlled professionalism, while executives casually discuss the end of the world like a business opportunity. But when the meeting ends and the room empties, the performance stops. Barb doesn't celebrate, posture, or retreat into silence. Instead, she chooses someone to confide in. That person is Betty Pearson. Up to this point, Betty has been framed as institutional background. She begins as a vault secretary, later becomes an overseer, and exists mostly on the edges of power. She doesn't dominate scenes, deliver monologues, or stake ideological claims. She listens, observes, and carries out her role efficiently. That's precisely why Barb's choice matters. When someone as high-ranking and as cornered as Barb decides who to trust in private, that decision tells us more than any speech ever could. Barb openly acknowledges that the situation is worse than anyone is publicly admitting, specifically referencing the cold fusion project and other Vault-Tec secrets that go far beyond standard corporate secrecy. More importantly, she asks Betty for help, not with scheduling, not with logistics, but with gathering information. That single request redefines Betty's role in the story. Barb isn't explaining the stakes to Betty or easing her into the truth. She's speaking as if Betty already understands it. That assumption alone suggests a deeper level of trust and shared awareness than the show has previously made explicit. The episode quietly supports this interpretation earlier during the water chip presentation. For longtime Fallout fans, water chips aren't just mechanical failures. They're foundational to the franchise's themes. In classic Fallout lore, many water chips were designed to fail intentionally as part of Vault-Tec's social experiments. Scarcity wasn't an accident. It was the point. Episode 6 taps into that legacy without spelling it out in heavy exposition. Instead, it lets the audience observe who understands what's being said. While most people in the room treat the explanation as routine corporate background noise, Betty is visibly engaged. She takes notes, tracks implications, and reacts not with shock, but with comprehension. She understands that these failures aren't isolated incidents or unfortunate oversights. They are systemic and intentional. Recognizing that requires accepting Vault-Tec's true philosophy, one in which human suffering is not a tragedy to be avoided, but data to be collected. This context makes the later scene between Barb and Betty far more unsettling. Betty doesn't just know that vaults fail. She understands why they fail. She understands the logic behind engineered collapse and controlled desperation. That knowledge alone separates her from most characters in the series. It's also where some viewers begin to jump ahead, assuming Betty must therefore be directly aligned with the Enclave or fully aware of its ideological endgame. That conclusion is tempting, but the show hasn't earned that certainty yet. What Episode 6 does establish, however, is arguably more disturbing. Betty understands the system. She understands Vault-Tec's experimental logic, the ethical emptiness behind it, and how information flows inside institutions designed to outlive governments, nations, and even the apocalypse itself. Fallout has never portrayed its most powerful characters as emotional ones. It rewards calm, adaptability, and the ability to process catastrophe without flinching. This is where Betty and Barb diverge in a meaningful way. Barb is driven by fear and attachment, particularly the need to protect her family. Her intelligence is undeniable, but her choices are reactive. Every decision she makes is shaped by urgency, pressure, and the looming sense that control is slipping through her fingers. Betty, on the other hand, shows no visible emotional rupture. She listens carefully, processes information, and prepares. She neither justifies Vault-Tec's actions nor condemns them out loud. That silence is telling. In Fallout's universe, emotional restraint is often a marker of long-term survivability. The people who last aren't necessarily the ones who oppose the system most loudly. They're the ones who understand how to function within it. Episode 6 reinforces this theme across its other storylines, especially in how it frames the Enclave. Rather than chaotic evil, the Enclave is presented as patient, ideological, and deeply invested in long-term outcomes. It's a force that plans decades ahead instead of reacting emotionally to immediate crises. Against that backdrop, Betty's quiet competence feels intentional. She doesn't need to be the architect of the apocalypse to matter. She only needs to understand how the apocalypse is managed. That idea gives new weight to the episode's title, The Other Player. The obvious players in Fallout are loud. They argue, posture, and dominate scenes. The other player is the one who watches, learns, and positions themselves while everyone else is distracted. Viewed this way, Betty's rise from secretary to overseer feels less like coincidence and more like vetting. Vault-Tec doesn't elevate people who ask moral questions at the wrong time. It promotes people who can absorb catastrophic truths without breaking. That doesn't make Betty a traditional villain. Fallout doesn't deal in clean moral categories. Instead, it presents characters who accept monstrous systems because they believe order is preferable to chaos, or because chaos feels inevitable no matter what choices are made. Betty may genuinely believe that controlled experiments are better than uncontrolled extinction, or she may simply understand that survival favors proximity to power rather than resistance to it. Either way, she is not naive, and she is not passive. That is the real revelation of Episode 6. Not that Vault-Tec was corrupt, because that was never in doubt, and not that the Enclave is looming, because the show has been foreshadowing that all season. The revelation is that some characters were never confused about what was happening. They weren't reacting to disaster. They were positioning themselves within it. This realization reframes how future episodes should be watched. If faults begin to fail again, intentionally or otherwise, Betty is exactly the kind of character who would be deciding which ones receive support and which become expendable data points, not out of cruelty, but out of efficiency. Fallout consistently rewards efficiency far more often than it rewards morality. What makes this storytelling effective is its restraint. There is no dramatic music cue telling you Betty matters, no close-up demanding attention. The show trusts the audience to notice who is allowed into private truths and who is kept outside them. That confidence is also a warning. In Fallout, the characters who don't demand attention early are often the ones shaping events later. The wasteland isn't ruled by the loudest voices. It's ruled by the people who understood the rules before the bombs fell. Episode 6 doesn't ask you to fear Betty Pearson. It asks you to start watching her. And if Fallout's history is any indication, the people quietly taking notes during the apocalypse are usually the ones writing the future afterward.